Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Stephen King podcast. This is another bonus episode. This is bonus episode 43, and I'm very happy to have with me a debut author, and that would be author Lauri Schoenfeld, or Feld. Am I saying that right?
Schoenfeld, you got it.
Schoenfeld, okay, great. Hi, Lauri, welcome aboard.
Hello, Lou. How are you today?
Not too bad, and we're here to talk about your debut novel, Little Owl. See, I got it right this time. I didn't say Night Owl. And we're going to dive into that a little bit, but before we do that, we want to set the table, of course, and find out a little bit about you and how you made your journey to become an author with your debut novel. So let's start with your background in terms of, were you a voracious reader when you were younger?
I was. I started at the age of 7 reading Nancy Drew novels. That was my first deep dive into mystery, which then led me into, Mary Higgins Clark, which moved more into the thriller, mystery, suspense aspect. And I could not get enough of that genre. It was just something that intrigued me from a very young age and kept intriguing me through my teen and adult years.
Very good. And because this is an adjunct to the Stephen King podcast, I have to ask if you ever read any Stephen King growing up.
Yes, I absolutely did. The Stand, for whatever reason, I read that multiple times and I was very fascinated by the storyline, the depth, the characters, but also like the intrigue, the elements of fear. There were so many different weaves that Stephen King puts on his stories that fascinated me as well, with the character arcs that he likes to build within that mystery and thriller element and horror.
Right. And I apologize if there's background noise. For some reason, there's leaf blowers outside, so I can't really do anything about that, but we'll just soldier on, and it just adds to the ambiance of this podcast, because it is fall. So,
As is fall.
And here in Alberta, the leaves fall for pretty early, so that's what's happening right now. Anyhow, so that's great. You're into that type of storytelling. And how did you get from becoming a reader to deciding to finally write something?
So I grew up in my home. I was a child abuse survivor. There was a lot of trauma, and I was constantly, because of this element, intrigued, trying to understand why people behave the way that they do. How I can see my parents, who seem, they're my parents. They're supposed to be loving, supportive, different things that you expect from parents, but yet they seem like there was so much trauma, stress, fear that they were projecting on to everyone within our home. And so I grew up with this fascination of trying to understand people, trying to understand the depth of their emotions, why they behave in the way that they do, which really led me into as well that mystery thriller aspect, the curiosity and wonder about people.
That sounds like a very poignant background and I'm sure provide a lot of grist for the mill for your creative outlets. How did you go about actualizing this background that you had in terms of your craft for writing? Did you take formal education, or how did that come about for you?
Yeah, so in high school, I did a lot of creative writing classes. I took journalism. I love journalism because that really opened up a lot of questions, again, going into why people behave the way that they do and finding the story behind the story. And I loved the creative writing aspect, all the courses that I had taken there, where I got to really examine and explore and express those deep fears and deep emotions that I was feeling, which I later incorporated into my novel writing. It started first within poetry and songwriting, and then maneuvered into, hey, I want to try writing a novel. And I brought a lot of those deep-seated fears and emotions within specifically Little Owl.
And when you started to craft this novel, like, how autobiographical was this then? Like, is this was this like self-therapy for you, or?
It's a really great question. It was. It was a blend of, it started out as journal entries. I didn't have the concept yet of Little Owl, but I was writing a lot about my fears and anxiety that was plaguing me on a day-to-day basis. I was so caught in anxiety and fear that I could not really move into reality and do day-to-day things. It had become that bad for me. And so I had tried a lot of bandaging for a long time. I had a few addictions that I was trying to wean away from, a lot of behaviors and mannerisms that were not healthy, that were just quick fixes. And I got to a point where something had to change. And for me, it was, I want to put everything on paper of what I'm feeling and expressing and just let it out somewhere, as I was holding so much of it inside, not telling anyone what I was really feeling. So it definitely started out as very much autobiography based in my story. And then the characters started speaking to me and took their own turn on what the story was going to be. So a little blend of both.
Right. That's an interesting process in terms of how you would structure your story then, because when you were doing these journal entries, I don't want to imagine that at that time you had an end in mind for your story. So how did you take that material and rework it so that you had like a book with a beginning, middle, and end?
Mm-hmm. I started with the journal entries, gave me the premise of the story. And as I was walking through trying to figure out where the story needed to go and how I wanted to create it, it organically kind of took its own space of where I would like to be. And so that's kind of where I looked at Adeline's main character. Where would I want my main character to end up? Or where would I want myself to end up? And the answer was, being in a space where I had my own voice, where I wasn't stuck and trapped or felt this feeling of being stuck in anxiety and fear, and being able to have a life that felt fairly normal, but at least not normal per se, but more grounded, where I was in control of my own feelings and my own emotions. And so looking at it from that perspective, then I could start, even though I personally wasn't there yet, I was able to investigate and talk to people that had gone through the same similar things that I had gone through, but had moved past a space that I hadn't yet moved past.
Right. Interesting. So this must have been, by the time you went through this whole process, this must have been very cathartic for you.
It absolutely was.
And do you feel, are you more at peace now with your history than before you started the book? Or is it just, you just are back to where you were?
No, I absolutely feel more at peace. I felt like it's interesting where this is a lot of autobiography. My main character was her own person completely. So I felt as if, as I was going through the journey with Adeline and she was stepping into her own fears in the story, I was also stepping into my own fears and giving myself permission to do that right alongside her as well.
Right.
So it definitely helped to move me through the fears and anxiety that I was feeling to get into a much healthier space for myself.
Interesting. I don't know if this is too personal, but I have to ask,
Yeah.
Has your family, are they aware of this book? Your parents or your brothers or your siblings? Or what was their reaction to it, if any?
That is a really wonderful question. I actually am not, because that's actually one of the fears that I had. When you put something out there in the world that is so much a part of you, there is for sure that fear and worry of, who am I going to hurt? Is this going to impact them? Is this going to be a problem? And I definitely had a lot of those fears writing this story. And that's part of the reason it took 11 years for me, was not just writing the book, but like my own imposter syndrome of that worry of what is going to happen or what the outcome would be. But I actually have set some healthy boundaries with both my parents. So we do not talk. As they both want to continue being in abusive relationships. And that was one of the healing things that I had to choose into for myself of, do I want to stay in these relationships with, yes, they're family members, but they're unhealthy and they're hurting me and I'm hurting myself staying there.
Right.
Or do I want to move away from that and change the cycle for my own family, as I have 3 children and I don't want to continue that cycle.
Right.
for them. And so I'm sure they're aware of it, but I'm at peace knowing that this is a part of my heart that was okay to share as it's my story.
Right.
And we've kind of separated and set those boundaries in a healthy space for where I am right now.
Okay. And do you have siblings?
I do.
And
yes.
How are they taking it?
I honestly am not sure because there's a little bit of a distance with my brother and sister. I'm the oldest as well. And for me personally, I choose that I have my own perspective and have my own story, but I don't want my siblings to feel like they ever have to choose a side.
Right.
That's really important for me. And so they're in a safe space where, they're choosing what's best for them.
Sure.
Which is just being separated from our relationship's a little distant right now, but I hold respect for that of wherever they need to be to kind of go through their own healing and truth and understanding as everyone has their own process to work through.
Right. Right. Well, I appreciate you for sharing that. It's obviously very, very personal for you, and it can't be easy to talk about. So kudos to you for the bravery that you've shown in doing so.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, what point did you, why did you decide, like, to me, this could sound more like an autobiography or a memoir as opposed to a fiction story. What was the thing that prompted you to decide to do it in terms of fiction?
Oh, man. I think just going back to my love for Nancy Drew and Mary Higgins Clark, one of the things was they had multiple POVs, which I loved because as I'm going through my journey, I can only see my perspective.
Right.
And for me, that feels very real. But the thing that I find so fascinating just in life and fiction, is everyone has their own fears and their own perspectives, and we're reacting to each other all the time based on only our perspective. And so I wanted to bring in that element where with it being an autobiography or a memoir, it'd only be my perspective. And I wanted to be able to see multiple characters' perspectives on not only how they're dealing with their own fears, but how they're seeing other people deal with their trauma too.
Okay, so the fact that you're using multiple POVs is what made you just made that decision.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and that's quite ambitious for a first novel. Most first-time novelists only stick with one POV.
Yes, it is. I heard that a few times of the 11-year journey of are you sure this is the first one that you want to stick with? And I was like, I know this is super ambitious, but if I can learn a lot from it, I'm okay with that. Just as long as I'm continuing to build my craft, grow and learn within this element of the story, then it's worth it for me. But yeah, it was very ambitious for sure.
And so of the 11 years, was there long periods where you just put it away and had to, whether just life got in the way or you just needed to process it internally a bit more?
Yes, I had moments where definitely life took a step forward and I put the manuscript away at times. But then also I put the manuscript away where there were moments I was really going through my own healing and processing different stages in my life, which were also needed to process so I could bring in those different scenes and settings and that vibe within the story as well and really give that organic feel to what really took place in those moments.
Right. Okay, so let's delve a little deeper into the actual book then, Little Owl.
Yes.
What the interesting title, does it have a significance, I assume, to the story?
It absolutely does. Little Owl is a trigger word for Adeline, as when she was a little girl, she remembers that someone used to call her a little owl. And she can't remember if it was a positive or a negative experience. And so when she is searching for her girls that go missing and are presumed dead, someone is calling her, following her and calling her a little owl. And so that naturally brings a lot of fear into her because of the setup that someone's following her, calling her this name. And she can't place why she knows this terminology. just that she does.
Hmm.
And so that's one of the questions that she's also trying to figure out as she's trying to find out what happened to her daughters is, why is someone calling me Little Al and why is this important? I know that it's in my past somewhere. I just can't remember why.
Okay, so the arc of the story then is a mother's daughters have gone missing, and she's trying to find out what happened.
Yeah, so Adeline Rushner is the main character. She's an unstable mother who wants to build consistency and stability within her home, but just is not sure how to quite do that with their own trauma and PTSD. And so when her daughters go missing and are presumed dead, she's really plagued into this space of this can't be my reality and goes down this chain of what really happened to my daughters, which sets her off into examining her own childhood trauma and trying to figure out why someone would take her girls to begin with.
Wow. So that's pretty heavy material.
Yes, it is.
And so this is obviously a very adult themed story. It's a straight thriller mystery? There's no supernatural elements or anything of that nature in it?
No supernatural, all psychological thriller with some suspense and mystery blended in.
Okay. And multiple POVs. Who are the other POVs in your book?
Yes, thank you for asking that. Her husband, Cash, has his own POV, Cash Rushner. We have a childhood friend that comes back into the picture at a very random time named Sam. Officer Abbott is the officer on her case who is also attached to this case because his daughter went missing a year ago and has very similar features to Adeline's daughter. So it kind of looks like a copycat killing murder type situation. We have her therapist, which helps her just open up some of her repressed memories. And then we have someone named the Owl Keeper, who we don't know who it is, just that he's someone from her past and she's trying to figure out who and why he has now come into her life at this given moment.
Wow. You've really George Martin's your book. So
yes.
So how do you use POV? Do you keep it to like alternate chapters, and is chapter titled with the character's name, or do you have multiple POVs within a chapter? How did you approach that?
I did different chapters for each character so we could get a feel. So their names are up at the top with the timeline so we can kind of see where we are in the story as far as, the setting and the time, but also whose POV we're going to be in on each given chapter. Okay.
And I'm assuming, does Adeline have the most chapters then? Or like how do you establish that she's the main character?
She definitely has the majority of the chapters. I would say probably, each of the other POVs has about a third less of the chapters from Adeline. So she is absolutely the main character in the story.
Okay. And when there's, obviously besides her husband, when she's interacting with the other characters, is the story told from her point of view in those characters in those chapters? I'm sorry, or depending on what your purpose is with the chapter, do the other characters have a POV when the main character's in the chapter?
That's a really great question. I kind of wove in because it can get really confusing for sure when you do multiple POVs. Which one is it? But I chose to do. Each one has their own chapter. So we get their perspective and what their fears, addictions, obsessions are to really get the depth of the character. But also we're getting dialogue from each one of these characters are connecting in some form. And we're trying to figure out how they're connected through dialogue and through body language of what each character that has a chapter is seeing within their environment.
Right. And I assume that you're, maybe intentionally or not, using these multiple POVs to set up a situation where the readers at certain points in the story may know more than Adeline does?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Which is always good for tension.
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah. And did you realize that when you were writing it, or is that something that you came out more clearly in your, I don't know how many drafts you did, or did you do beta readers and get feedback and so forth?
I did. I had 24 full edits with,
Wow.
beta readers, critique partners, because of the fact that there were multiple POV, and I wanted it to be woven in a way that made sense.
Right.
Also, the first edit, I wrote it as a writer knowing everything that was going to happen. And then I had to go back on some of the edits and say, okay, I know you as a writer know what's going to happen. But you have to sustain belief that Adeline does not know, even though you know, and the readers need to have a clue before Adeline. So that was definitely took a few edits to go through and be like, okay, are we 5 steps back from what I know? What does this look like? And give that experience.
Right. And how did you map that out? Were you using cue cards or graph paper or?
My poor husband, I think he was when I was mapping it out, I put everything on the wall and it looked like a crime scene investigation with pictures and details of this is what they look like, this is what they're feeling, and then thread weaving from character to character to show where they need to be at any given moment. So yeah.
So that's because that's such a constant image now, especially with shows like CSI and whatnot, to see a murder board with all these strings and whatnot. And hopefully you didn't have strings going all over the place. I don't know if you did or not, but and tacks, but that's always an interesting exercise. It's so important for making sure that the novel hangs together as a cohesive whole, because there's going to be somebody out there that's going to say, hey, this can't work because you missed this over here, or this contradicts that over there. And I'm sure that your beta readers probably gave you some interesting feedback.
They absolutely did. And I hated it, but they were right.
Yeah.
Darn it, I have to do that scene again. Oh, gosh.
Right. So is this a standalone?
I left it as a standalone for the possibility of a trilogy, which we're moving into creating a trilogy. So.
Oh, interesting. And what's the occupation of the main character?
Adeline Rushner is an antique dealer. So she works at an antique shop and refurbishes old pieces of metal and antiques, and is the owner of this cute little store.
Okay. And how much research did you do into antiquing?
Oh my God, I love antique stores. So that was a really fun. I was like, okay, what kind of job can I give her that's quirky, that is just super damn fun in the research? So that was, for me, I just got to go shop at a lot of antique stores and talk to the owner about what are the most unique pieces and why, what do they sell for? What are the things people are often looking for? Why is that important? I had a lot of fun doing the research for the antique stores.
Okay. And were you able to work in the antiquing as some sort of vital thread into the resolution of the story, or is it just a supporting detail for the character?
That's Adeline. She loves, a big part of her, she feels, because of her trauma and the different things that she has gone through, she feels like she's broken. And so she looks at this antique shop as being able to mend together these broken pieces that people would normally throw out and make something beautiful. And for her, that's very symbolic of what she wants to be, that she's not broken, that she still can be beautiful, even though she has those breaks, and that she can heal from them. And so for her, it is very much a big internal piece of her journey, being surrounded by all of these thrown away things, trying to put them back together as she's trying to put herself back together too.
Right, for sure. Curious, given this is your debut novel and the timeline, I don't know when this story takes place, but if it was in present day, did you incorporate COVID into your story, or did you just ignore it?
So I started writing this about 11 years ago. So I put this out last year. Or not last year, excuse me. It was in 2019, so right before COVID hit. So there's no COVID conversation in this novel specifically. Okay.
And going forward, how are you going to handle that?
I have actually, I really love these questions, Lou, because I've been curious about that too I think there's a blend between, do we bring in the conversation of COVID or do we leave it out? And I honestly, in my personal opinion, feel like we should talk about the things that are current events of what we're going through,
Right.
because that's what we relate to within the characters. And we're looking for books and shows and inspiration for characters that are going through similar things to what we're going through. And so it makes sense to me going forward, having more characters that do have stories of COVID, that do have stories of Black Lives Matter, who do have the different situations that we're going through in this moment, to connect with the characters with where we are now.
Right. I don't think there's any right answer here. This depends on the writer's sensibilities, because I've heard other writers saying, no, I'm not going to deal with it because this is meant to be, what I'm writing is escapism and people want to escape from real world problems. So I don't want to bog it down with this real world stuff. But on the other hand, like you just said, people look to the fiction and the arts for inspiration or perspectives on how to handle situations that everybody's going through that might provide different solutions for them. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I'm always curious to see how writers approach it.
Absolutely. Yep. I enjoy that too about, us being creatives, is because we all have such different perspectives. But I think that's what makes it so beautiful, is there is a blend of both. There are people that are going to want to connect to the characters and people that will want to escape.
Right.
And so I think it's a beautiful thing that whatever the author creative is feeling that they want to write, knowing that there will be a space for it with someone out there with what they're needing.
Right. So on the more, practical, mundane type of things that you had to do for this book, are you self-published? Or
I am, yes.
Okay. And how was that process for you?
I am so proud of the team that I picked. I have a friend that I reached out to. She had her own self-publishing team with a cover artist, an editor, a copy editor, and it went so beautiful and so smoothly, the whole journey, as she's built her own team. And they really walked with me through the process, but it was a very hands-on experience where I got to pick and choose different ideas for the cover, which was super fun. We were able to go through as many edits as was needed till we felt like it was ready.
Right.
And it was a really fun process for me walking through with this team. I wouldn't have asked for anything else. Like, honestly, it was kind of one of the best decisions I made, was to go through this team at Shade Silk Press. So,
okay, cool. That's good, because lots of writers have had horror stories or find it a very difficult task to get their book bundled up and packaged. So where is your book available then?
You can find it's on Amazon, any big sites. It's up there for Little Owl. You can also find it on my website, laurischoenfeld.com.
Okay.
And I'm on all social media platforms as well, if you would like to connect or have any questions.
Right. Okay. And I'll put those in the liner notes for this episode. So if people are interested, they can just click on it and they'll be taken to your all your various outlets. So that will not be an issue. So you mentioned that you might be turning this into a trilogy. Is there any other projects? Do you have a couple of pokers in the fire, so to speak?
I do. I am working on a YA contemporary story right now, which is a little bit of a different feel, going from thriller. It's a lot more light, but still raw. I tend to really like to write the real and the raw stories. For me personally. So that's kind of my go-to. So that's in edits right now. And then I'm working on a new project here. November is NaNoWriMo month. So I am getting my fingers ready to go, and I'm excited and creating something new.
Cool. Is that the first time you're going to be doing that, or?
This is probably about the 7th year that I've done NaNoWriMo. So. Okay.
And for people out there who don't know what NaNoWriMo is, you want to give a quick little overview?
Yes. NaNoWriMo is awesome. It starts in November and runs till November 30th, where you go online with a group of other writers and you make a goal of writing 50,000 words within November. It's really fun. There's a lot of groups that sprint together so that you always have someone that's writing with you, motivating you to continue to keep writing to hit your goals.
Right.
And I definitely I definitely recommend it, as it's just a really good support team of
Mm.
writers banding together to support the arts.
Right. Yes, it's a good exercise because for a lot of writers, it's such a solitary experience. So just to
Mhm.
get some sort of connections and feedback and support from other writers can be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yes.
Alrighty. I think that's everything that I had. Is there anything that you would like to mention that hasn't been discussed so far?
I had such a great time with you, Lou. Thank you
Oh,
for
great.
having me.
No, not a problem. Again, I appreciate your bravery and honesty. It sounds like you've had quite a journey to get to where you are right now, and I wish you all the best in your future project.
Thank you. All the best to you as well.
Thank you. All right. So that is Lauri Schoenfeld. You can find her book on Amazon and probably all the other major book outlets. And I want to thank you again, Laurie, for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.